A small, fragile voice broke through Henry Cole's quiet dinner. A girl, no older than 4, stood by his table in a tattered hoodie, looking at him with desperate, wide eyes. "Daddy, I'm hungry," she whispered. The word daddy sent a shock through Henry's soul. She looked remarkably like someone he had lost long ago. Before he could process the situation, the restaurant manager intervened with cold hostility, accusing the child of begging and attempting to drag her away. The girl struggled, crying out for Henry to save her, which triggered a fierce protective instinct in him. The confrontation turned physical when the manager's aggression caused the girl to fall and strike her head on the stone floor. Seeing the child bleed, Henry's composure shattered. He roared at the manager to stay away and knelt to comfort the sobbing girl, whose name was Mila. He realized she wasn't just hungry for food, but starved for safety. After threatening the manager with professional ruin, Henry took Mila into his arms and promised she was safe. He called his personal contact to arrange for medical care and a background investigation, determined to find out who she was. As she sat across from him, eating with trembling hands and fearing she might be sent away, Henry made a silent vow to protect her, realizing that his life had changed the moment she called his name. The name Eric hit Henry like a physical blow, resurfacing a past he had long tried to bury. As Mila sat beside him, carefully dabbing her injured forehead, Henry realized this encounter was a reckoning he could no longer escape. Despite her age, the girl spoke of pain and loss with a haunting normalcy, describing a fire and a mysterious woman who had abandoned her. She insisted with heartbreaking certainty that she belonged with Henry, calling him Daddy, as she ate the food he shared with her. When Henry's associate Gregory arrived, he confirmed a grim reality. A man named Eric had recently perished in a Bronx fire, leaving no official next of kin. This news solidified Henry's resolve. He refused to let Mila be taken away by authorities or strangers, choosing instead to become her protector. Clinging to his hand with fragile trust, Mila found safety in his presence, while Henry, armed with a DNA test kit and a newfound sense of purpose, prepared to uncover the full truth of their connection and face the shadows of his former life. The journey to St. Luke's Hospital was filled with a heavy silence as Mila sat beside Henry, still clinging to the belief that he was her father. Henry felt a new kind of responsibility. He wasn't just protecting a stranger, but a child who had already chosen him as her family. During the drive, Mila admitted her greatest fear wasn't Henry, but the people who might take her away again. Henry firmly promised that no one would remove her without his permission, finally stepping into the role of her guardian. At the hospital, thanks to Gregory's arrangements, they bypassed the usual lines and met with Dr. Patel. The medical examination revealed that while Mila had minor cuts and bruises, she was physically stable. However, the doctor noted signs of deep emotional trauma and neglect. Henry insisted on a DNA test to uncover the truth of their connection, and Mila remained unerringly still during the procedure, showing a maturity beyond her years born from a life of hardship. As the tests were completed, a weary Mila sat on the exam bed, her future now resting entirely in Henry's hands. Dr. Patel revealed a shocking detail. A victim from a recent fire had been identified only by a melted tag that read Eric C. Henry immediately requested a DNA comparison, convinced of a deep connection. While waiting, he showed Mila an old photograph of himself and his long-lost son, Eric. Mila instantly recognized Eric as her father, confirming Henry's deepest suspicion. The test results later solidified this truth. Mila was not his daughter, but his biological granddaughter. Henry was overwhelmed with regret for having turned Eric away years ago, but he vowed never to make the same mistake with Mila. With the help of his associate Gregory and a top family lawyer, Henry began the legal process for emergency guardianship to keep Mila out of the foster care system. The next morning, he personally brought her breakfast, a small gesture that marked the beginning of his new life as her protector. Mila asked with heartbreaking hope if he would stay her daddy forever, and Henry, moved his core, promised she would never feel unwanted again. The billionaire who once cared only for power and control finally found a new purpose in the quiet hospital room, dedicated to the little girl who had brought him back to his own family. Henry remained by Mila's side throughout the night, officially accepting his role as her temporary guardian. However, a heartbreaking discovery awaited him. Gregory found two old voicemails from Eric that Henry had never heard. In the first, Eric reached out years ago, simply wanting to know his father. In the second, left just before his death, he pleaded for Henry to save Mila from the foster care system. The realization that he had unknowingly missed his son's cries for help devastated Henry, but also solidified his resolve to never let Mila down. After the judge signed emergency custody papers, Henry took Mila to his grand, quiet townhouse on the Upper East Side. As they stood before the massive front door, Mila felt hesitant, asking if such a place could truly be for her. Henry, seeing his cold and empty home through her eyes for the first time, realized it was finally time to fill it with life. He assured her she wouldn't have to share her pancakes with anyone else and promised she was finally safe. As Mila lined up her small shoes next to his in the hallway, Henry knew that while he couldn't change the past, he would spend the rest of his life building a future for his granddaughter. Henry's cold mansion slowly began to transform into a real home. With the help of his kind housekeeper, Marjorie, Mila started to feel the warmth of a family, even though she still struggled to trust her new surroundings. In a quiet moment, she questioned Henry about his own sadness and his lost son, showing a wisdom far beyond her 4 years. Henry realized that Mila didn't just need a roof over her head. She needed someone who wouldn't disappear when things got difficult. Justice was served when Henry and Gregory tracked down the woman who had exploited Mila on the streets. Standing in the shadows of a dark alley, Henry watched as the woman was arrested, making it clear that her days of hurting children were over. He wasn't acting as a businessman, but as a grandfather protecting his own. Following this, Henry signed the official adoption papers with his lawyer, Marion Hayes, formally reclaiming the granddaughter he never knew he had. The story concludes with a new beginning. Henry traded his board meetings for morning breakfasts and school runs. He enrolled Mila in a prestigious school, watching with pride as she took her first steps toward a future defined by education rather than fear. As they read The Velveteen Rabbit together, the line about becoming real through love resonated deeply. Henry Cole, once a man of stone, had finally become real himself, finding his greatest purpose in the eyes of the little girl who now called him Daddy and meant it. At Mila's new school, the headmaster noticed something profound. Mila's presence didn't just change her own life, but it softened Henry's as well. For the first time, people saw the billionaire not as a distant tycoon, but as a devoted father. Mila confided that since living with him, her constant anxiety had vanished. Henry realized that while he couldn't change the fact that he wasn't her first father, he was determined to be her real one, the one who stays. A symbolic turning point occurred when Henry allowed Mila to move into his late son Eric's bedroom. For years, the room had been a frozen museum of grief, but Mila's presence brought light back into the space. She treated Eric's belongings with reverence, asking if he was kind and if he would mind her being there. Henry assured her that Eric would want someone as brave as her to fill the room with life again. This act of opening the door to the past allowed both Henry and Mila to begin healing together. The climax of Henry's transformation took place in the boardroom of Cole International. Facing his stunned business partners, Henry did the unthinkable. He prioritized his family over his fortune. He openly acknowledged his past failures with his son, Eric, and declared that he would no longer lead a life where power was more important than people. Henry appointed an interim CEO and stepped away from his empire, choosing to build a future with Mila instead of building more skyscrapers. He realized that a life of precision was empty without the personal connections that truly matter. Henry transitioned into an advisory role at his company, making it clear to his board that if they couldn't accept his new priorities, they weren't as strong as he thought. Returning home, he found Mila playing a game where a daddy bear rescued a dinosaur, realizing that it had finally become the hero she believed him to be. Despite his immense power, Henry found his greatest joy in simple moments, choosing to be known by Mila as a person rather than just a name on a skyscraper. However, Mila's past trauma resurfaced during a November storm. She feared that the woman who had exploited her would find her again. Henry crouched beside her and promised that his house had strong locks and stronger people, vowing to be her permanent shield. Meanwhile, Gregory and the police intensified the pressure on Tasha Price. Seeing Henry's public declaration of Mila as his own family, Tasha's defiance crumbled. and she began to reveal the dark secrets of her criminal network, realizing that she could no longer intimidate anyone. The story reached its emotional peak when Henry went public with the truth. He released a press statement seeking full custody of Mila, turning what was once a private tragedy into a bold stand for family and justice. He replaced his whiskey with cocoa and his board meetings with bedtime stories. Mila finally stopped feeling like a secret or a mistake. She realized that while storms have names, so do shields, and her shield's name was Henry. In the quiet of their home, as the headlines buzzed outside, the bond between the billionaire and the little girl became unbreakable. The transformation of real estate giant Henry Cole became a subject of intense media debate, with some questioning his motives, while others saw a man finally finding redemption. Henry, however, cared little for public opinion. His world now centered on Mila and the quiet joy of watching her thrive. Despite losing the companionship of his elite social circle, Henry found a much deeper fulfillment in being a real father. He realized that while his former friend saw Mila as a mistake, she was actually the first thing in his life he had ever gotten truly right. The climax of their journey took place in a silent, expectant family courtroom. Facing Judge Margaret Fulton, a woman known for her uncompromising fairness, Henry spoke from a heart. He didn't offer a corporate defense. Instead, he admitted that he was a man who had been given a second chance by a child who trusted him before he deserved it. Moved by his sincerity and the visible bond between the two, the judge granted Henry full and permanent custody of Mila Rose Carter. In that moment, the legal title finally caught up to the reality of their hearts. They were officially a family as they left the courthouse into November air. Henry's priorities were forever shifted. He was no longer a man defined by the skyscrapers he built, but by the home he was creating for his daughter. When a reporter asked for a comment, Henry simply stated that justice is what happens when a child finally hears the word home and believes it. As they drove away to celebrate with hot chocolate, Henry realized that Mila's opinion of him was the only headline that would ever matter again. He had finally learned that the most important legacy isn't written in stone or steel, but in the heartbeat of the person you love. She asked suddenly. I'm sure they do, he said. Why? Because even when you leave the world behind, he answered, you still carry everything that matters with you. Mine? She thought for a second. That's heavy. It is, he smiled. But it also keeps you grounded. Even in space. Even in space. They lay in silence for a moment. Then Mila whispered, were there other girls like me? Henry didn't answer right away. Yes, he said. Finally, there were. She turned to him. Will you help them, too? He met her eyes. I will. She nodded once, solemn. Good, because nobody else did it. See, that night after Mila had gone to bed, Henry stood alone in Eric's old room, the one Mila now called hers. He looked around at the glow in the dark, stars on the ceiling, the book she had left open on her pillow, the drawing of her and Henry taped to the closet door. He thought of the other children, the other names in the file, the silence they lived in, the fear, the neglect, and he realized something. He had found his purpose, not just to be her father, but to be their voice. For every child who had been tossed aside and told they were unworthy, for every Eric who had died protecting someone else's hope, he would speak, and when necessary, he would roar. It was a Thursday when the phone call came, not the kind of day that announces itself with warning, signs, or ominous clouds. Just a regular day with grocery lists and school pickup and the usual dance of ordinary things. Marjorie answered the house. Line, a habit she'd never broken, and called for Henry, with a voice that trembled more than usual. There's someone on the line, she said softly. Says he knows something about Eric, about the night he died. Henry took the phone with quiet caution. This is Henry Cole. The voice on the other end was raspy, uncertain. I wasn't gonna say anything, the man began, but I saw the girl in the papers, and I knew I couldn't hold it anymore. Who is this? Names. Lenny. I worked janitorial at the Granger building. Night. Shift 2 years ago. I was cleaning the back alley around. 3 a.m., that's when I saw it. Saw him now. Henry's grip on the phone tightened. Saw who? Your son, Lenny said. Eric. He was bleeding, trying to carry the little girl. Said someone was coming. Told me to run. I didn't help. I ran like a coward. Henry's voice dropped. Low. Do you know who was after him? I didn't then, but now I think I do. I saw the face of the woman who showed up a minute later. Same one from the papers. Now the social worker. Tasha. Henry and Mila's journey shifted from personal healing to public advocacy. Mila, once invisible and silent, found the courage to speak at a community event, sharing her story of survival to help reform child protective services. Henry realized that his true legacy wasn't in the buildings he constructed, but in the child he carried forward. This transformation was formalized when Mila was invited to the Cole Foundation Gala as a guest of honor. Standing before the city's elite, she declared that she was no longer invisible, a moment that moved even Henry's toughest former rivals to tears. Justice for Eric Carter also arrived when the city established the Eric Carter Courage Award in his honor on the snowy steps of the public library. Henry spoke of Eric as the kind of hero he hoped to become, a man who lived for someone else. They placed a permanent plaque in Eric's memory, ensuring that his sacrifice would never be forgotten. Henry further solidified this change by converting his entire foundation into a children's advocacy initiative, shifting his life's work from accumulating power to protecting the vulnerable. The story concludes with a beautiful full-circle moment. A woman and a young boy in need arrived at Henry's doorstep, having been inspired by Mila's story. Just as Henry had opened his heart to Mila, she now reached out to help the next child, proving that kindness creates a ripple effect. Henry realized that love doesn't just knock, it moves in and stays. He learned that family is defined by loyalty and the courage to show up, proving that compassion has the power to change everything.